Hi everybody, it's Dr. Elam. I'm here to answer your week 7 posts, which could have included questions from week 6, 7, or 8. It happens to be that the questions posted all have to do with Pilgrim's Progress, either from last week's reading or from this week's reading. I'll answer those in turn. And this will be it for our dialogue together. Now, I will post another overview in week 8 about our literary readings, but this is my last time engaging directly with your questions. Let's get right into it. And I've kind of taken them according to the stages of the journey that Christian is on. So Michaela asks about the sudden onslaught of questions in the first part of the journey with Pliable. Part of this is to show Pliable's nature as being easily influenced. If Pliable were to stick to his guns and move straight ahead, then he would no longer be that kind of character. Sorry folks, I had to pause the video for a second. So if Pliable were to stick with Christian through the journey, then he no longer would be Pliable. He would be a different kind of character, something akin to faithful or hopeful. So Pliable, at first, he pushes back against Obstinate, the character who does not want to go. So stubborn people resist the gospel, and anybody like Obstinate will do that. And the minute they decide, I'm going to go on the journey, that person we realize is not Obstinate anymore. And I've mentioned this in my overviews. Bunyan makes his characters, they are personifications of mindsets. It's a personification allegory. So they have to act in a certain way in order for Bunyan to show the person with this mindset will always do this kind of thing. And if they do something different, it indicates that their mindset is different and aren't really like that character. Anyway, back to Pliable in the original question. So Pliable asks a number of things about the celestial city. It gives Bunyan, the author, a chance to develop this view of the celestial city as an agreeable place to go, right? It's salvation. It's going to heaven. But it's not merely for that. I don't think Bunyan is using it as a narrative convenience. It shows that Pliable is only interested in the things that he's interested in. I know that sounds, I know it's circular reasoning. But Pliable, by his very nature, only leans to the things that are attractive. So when he finds that the journey might actually be difficult for him, this is something that his pliable nature is not interested in, and so he abandons Christian very early in the journey. Obstinate doesn't go with him. Pliable goes a little way, then it gets hard, and he's gone. So that's the significance of Pliable's questions. At a very basic level, it helps the narrative development, but I think what Bunyan is really trying to show is also there are individuals who look interested in the kingdom of heaven, but when the journey becomes difficult, then their pliability will turn them away. And it says that Christian never saw him again. The next question is from Thomas regarding Pope and Pagan. They're the two giants they look threatening, but they're actually no threat. And Thomas asks, what is the significance of this? Was Pope too stiff because of the effects of the Reformation in Europe? So from Bunyan's perspective, I think he is saying that Pope is not effective at all and has not been effective for a long time. That he has, I think he's toothless, or there's something about, I don't remember the exact detail, but there's something about him that shows there's no power, or there's no, I guess there's no power in his authority, right? He can't really do anything to the traveler. Now, Bunyan lived in a time when, yes, papal edicts and the authority of Rome could oppress people physically, like at the literal physical primary experience level. But Bunyan is indicating that the spiritual reality is the Pope has no power, and I don't think Bunyan is trying to be rude. I think he really believes this. I think he's saying that just as paganism has no power, no authority, is no threat to the true believer, so too the Pope is no threat to the believer. And I think Bunyan would say, by extension, the entire hierarchy of the Roman Catholic Church. Of course, with apologies to our Roman Catholic students and my Roman Catholic colleagues who, understand that Bunyan has some axes to grind. So it's less about the Reformation, which still would have been on Bunyan's mind, but is more about the impotence of the Pope, right? He has no power over Bunyan, the spiritual traveler. And in fact, I know you didn't ask this in your question, Thomas, but Bunyan would probably see the Anglican Church this way, right? The Church of England. Because Bunyan was a nonconformist, so he would not yield to either papal authority or to the authority of Canterbury. And for him, the real Christian journey is a journey of conscience. It's a journey that's very individualized. I think there's a lot of value to that view. Certainly some problems come with, the extreme versions of that view. But Bunyan was able to highlight the importance of having a personal faith with Christ, and a personal commitment to working out your salvation. Janet, skipping ahead now to the sixth stage, Janet asks about the men. This is in Vanity Fair. So the travelers are mocked, or they're distrusted because they dress differently, they speak differently. There are three reasons listed, and the third reason is that they won't buy the wares of the people at Vanity Fair. And Janet asks about the answer when Christian and faithful, when they are confronted with, buy the things here at Vanity Fair, buy the emptiness of the world, the vanities of the world. Christian and faithful answer, we buy the truth, which is a direct reference to Proverbs 23:23, which says, buy the truth and do not sell it, buy wisdom, instruction, and understanding. And that little verse is part of I think it's like 3 or 4 verse saying from Solomon, right? The book of Proverbs are these sayings from Solomon. And in that proverb, that buy the truth and don't sell it is in the context of family possessions, right? So your parents leave you with inheritances, your parents help you establish who you are, and so the things that you buy for your household, those important things, that becomes a metaphor for the truth itself. And actually, let me see if I can pull up the verse. I have it in one of my tabs here. Yes, okay, so this is Proverbs 23. It starts at verse 22 and goes to verse 25. The entire saying is this: listen to your father who gave you life, and do not despise your mother when she is old. Buy the truth and do not sell it, wisdom, instruction, and insight as well. The father of a righteous child has great joy. A man who fathers a wise son rejoices in him. May your father and mother rejoice. May she who gave you birth be joyful. And the reason they would be joyful is because their child buys truth as one of these important possessions of the entire household. And so that's what Christian and faithful are saying. They are saying that we are not interested in the ephemeral things of the world, the things that are passing away. We are interested in buying instruction, understanding, and the truth, which will help maintain us on our journey to the celestial kingdom, the celestial city. And of course, faithful pays for it with his life, and he's taken away very much like Elijah in a flaming chariot directly to heaven. And that's a symbol for persevering in faith even unto death. So those types of Christians, they don't walk the entirety of that difficult journey. Sometimes their journey is cut short in a very difficult place. Leah asked also about the sixth stage, also concerning the punishment for their faith. She asks if Bunyan is reflecting on his own experiences. Yes, he absolutely is. So Bunyan was imprisoned, I believe, twice over the course of time. He was in prison. He writes bits of Pilgrim's Progress, and he writes parts of his spiritual autobiography, Grace Abounding to the Chief of Sinners. I'm embarrassed to say I've not read the whole thing. I've read parts of Grace Abounding, and I think I find it very encouraging. I find it very edifying, and would recommend, based on the parts that I read, I would recommend it as reading for Christians interested in historical devotional biographies. So yes, he is absolutely thinking about his own experience. He's thinking about his own persecution in his own life. You could probably find dozens of scholarly studies that might even try to identify like what precise physical location is Vanity Fair. I think that Bunyan, even though he might picture a certain location, I think for Bunyan it's more the symbolic quality of Vanity Fair is more important than locating it somewhere. That can be interesting too. Julie, now we're skipping ahead even farther to the ninth stage of the journey. Julie asks about the Shining Ones, and it does seem kind of alarming, or the Shining One, there's only one. The Shining One who comes and rescues Christian and Hopeful after they've been led astray and they're trapped in a snare. And by the way, you may have noticed, if you're familiar with the scriptures, that Bunyan delights in taking specific biblical passages, specific scriptural passages, and turning those literal details in the passages into literal details in his story. And the beauty of it is this: the scriptures mean those literal details metaphorically, but uses them. And then Bunyan draws them in as his literal details in this allegory, this metaphor of the Christian journey. It's part of why I think Pilgrim's Progress is so masterfully done. He doesn't undermine, to my reading anyway, he doesn't undermine the scriptural integrity of the metaphor by turning it into a literal detail in his narrative. In fact, I think he presents it in the spirit of Scripture. So anyway, the Shining One comes up and whips Hopeful and Christian for not reading the notes of the shepherds. And, what are we to make of this incident? So the Shining One is not a bad figure. He's a stern figure, yes. My understanding, as I read it, the shepherds are pastors, right? So that's the Latin word for shepherd, or a Greek word, I think, for shepherd. And so when the shepherds teach Christian and Hopeful, that seems to be a reference to true preaching, true preachers of the gospel. And believers who receive true preaching of the gospel should make note of it, they should internalize it in some way, and then recognize when somebody comes and leads them astray, which is what happens to them. And so when the Shining One comes along and whips Christian and Hopeful, which is a literal detail from one of the Mosaic books, and I think there's a link in Pilgrim's Progress. Like you can click on those scripture links. There's a detail about like putting people on the ground and whipping their backs. So when the Shining One comes along, this is showing not only the price you pay by being led astray, and Bunyan is not trying to pile on and shame people. Remember that Christian is, in a sense, Bunyan himself. So he's not like pointing his finger at everybody else. Christian, though Christian stands for every Christian, Christian also stands for Bunyan too. So Bunyan is saying that the experience of being led astray and being delivered from that experience can be a painful experience. I don't know if he means the whipping would be like shame, or I don't know if he means that the whipping would be some kind of a chastisement from like a second true gospel preacher that has to come along and rescue you from error again. I'm not exactly sure precisely how that how he sees the pain of the whipping, but it's in the being rescued from error that the Shining One is doing this. So he's a positive figure, he's a stern figure, but he's helping Christian on his journey. Abby, also about the ninth stage, asks, and Abby also points out that this, you can trace this throughout Pilgrim's Progress, that the narrator has been telling us all along that he's dreaming this, right? That Christian is a character in a dream that he's been watching and observing. And he'll say, and in my dream I saw, and in my dream I saw. And so Abby asks, did Bunyan really dream up this entire book, or did he find writing to come more naturally when he thought about it as a dream? I am not that familiar with a lot of modern scholarship on Bunyan, but my hunch is that Bunyan, you could probably find this detail in Grace Abounding to the Chief of Sinners. Bunyan probably had a dream about a Christian figure in one of these scenes that ends up in Pilgrim's Progress, and then so it's a combination of both, right? And then from that extends the metaphor of the dream as a writer, right? As a poetic or creative writer would do. So it's a little bit of both. Probably Bunyan had at least one dream, maybe he had multiple dreams, and then built his allegory on that. Again, it's quite a brilliant work. And he's not alone, right? Bunyan's not alone in doing such things. Figures throughout the ages have had dreams, and then from the explicit details of the dream, they may expand that and tell a larger story. Rebecca asks, and this is kind of like a larger question about Pilgrim's Progress and Bunyan's strategy. Rebecca asks, is Bunyan strategic about where he places characters like obstinate, pliable, ignorance, and temporary, and all of those folks? Is he strategic about their proximity to the celestial city as opposed to the beginning of Christian's journey? And I actually appreciate the way you frame it. Rebecca, you say, you compare it to Dante, which I think is a valid and correct comparison. Is he doing like Dante does? The closer you get to the beatific vision, the more reliable the characters are in some way. Or is he doing something else? And you say, is he using these vices and virtues where it fits his narrative? I think that's right. I think for Bunyan, the matter is not so much proximity to the celestial city. The matter for him is the quality of a Christian journey throughout time. And it's probably informed by details from his own life, I'm certain. But you could meet Pliable at any stage along the journey. But for Christian to meet Pliable at the beginning of his journey seems especially appropriate, because that's when Christian is in danger of turning away. Now, if he had turned away, he wouldn't be Christian, he'd be Pliable. But I think Bunyan is trying to show that at various stages in the journey, there might be certain mindsets that are especially threatening. But I don't think, overall, I don't think that proximity is his main organizing principle. I think it is stages, different experiences in the Christian journey. Now, I will say at the end of part one, when I forgot his name, he's thrown into hell right at the gates of the celestial city. Bunyan really is making a point there about how a person can go through their entire life walking along a path that seems to lead to the celestial city and find out that they have been in error all the time. And, look, we can quibble with Bunyan about that, just like we can quibble with Dante about his metaphors, or we can quibble with Boethius about his metaphors, or whomever. But I think Bunyan, again, is not trying to wag his finger at the audience. I think Bunyan genuinely wants his audience to follow the right path, which is why maybe some of his imagery is as stern or as stark as it is, right? He doesn't want to gloss it over. And then Sarah asks about Pilgrim's Progress, also kind of in a larger sense, if it was inspired by another work that came before it, or did it pave the way to other allegories? So it's a yes to both of those questions. So I'm a medievalist, and the work that I think about when I read Pilgrim's Progress is a Middle English work, which we did not read for this class, called Piers Plowman. It's written by a man named William Langland in the 14th century, so like the 1370s, around there. Last half of the 14th century, right? And in that, and actually Chaucer, in the general prologue of the Canterbury Tales, you may remember that the parson was traveling with a plowman. That, I believe, is Chaucer gesturing to William Langland and saying, yes, the parson is a figure of integrity, just like William Langland's Piers Plowman is a figure of integrity. And that too is an allegory, where Piers, the plowman, tells the people in a dream. It's also a dream vision too. He tells the dreamer Will, which we should think of not as William Langland, just William Langland, but also Will, like our will. Piers teaches him, you can't trust in the papal bull, or you can't trust in the little document that you got from the pardoner that your sins are forgiven. You actually need to live a righteous life. And many students get upset about this because it seems to present a works righteousness way to salvation. And I get it. I do understand that. But Langland, his metaphor is trying to warn readers about complacency, about letting everybody else do the work of faith for you. And I think Bunyan has that in mind as he's developing Pilgrim's Progress. I don't think Bunyan is trying to imitate Langland. I think that Bunyan was probably familiar with Langland's writing. So the Piers Plowman tradition is a whole, you could devote a lifetime, people have devoted a lifetime of study to that one particular allegory. So I don't think he's trying to imitate Langland, but I think he has Langland's metaphors in mind. Throughout the Middle Ages, there are pageants that often will show the 7 deadly sins as characters, or the 7 virtues that counteract the 7 deadly sins. They are presented as characters too. So Bunyan is not really innovating in that sense. I think what Bunyan's great innovation is the maintaining of his personification allegory, which, like I said, personifying a concept is nothing new. He's maintaining that over the span of a long narrative, and he's doing so in a way that is both accessible to the basic reader, somebody who doesn't have maybe a ton of education, and also in a way that the educated reader, when they encounter Plowman, excuse me, Pilgrim's Progress, hang on, I need a drink here. When they encounter Pilgrim's Progress, even the educated reader can get something valuable, right? It's not so high that it's inaccessible to the rank and file, the everyday person, and it's not so low as to be contemptible to the educated person. That's part of Bunyan's brilliance. He's not putting on excuse me. He's not putting on airs, right? He's not trying to pretend to be what he's not. He's not trying to virtue signal or show off or anything like that. I think he genuinely cares. It may be why Pilgrim's Progress has lasted for as long as it's lasted. may be considered perhaps the greatest English language work ever to be written. That's no small feat, and there's a real case to be made for that. Excuse me again. And to the second part of your question, Sarah, to the second part of your question, that has spawned many, many Christian writers to write similar kinds of allegory. They're of mixed quality. There has been some garbage that, produced, garbage writing published, trying to be like Pilgrim's Progress. It's not very good. But there have also been, some very, I think, interesting personal narratives about Christian journeys that, kind of participate in Bunyan's allegory tradition. I'm hard pressed right now to think of them. I'm a medievalist, so most of my examples come pre-Bunyan. But Bunyan definitely carved out a place for this devotional literature based on experience, right? Maybe a testimonial type of literature. Not quite a testimony because it's still allegory, but it really set a precedent for doing such work. All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. Like I said, this is my last video answering your questions, addressing your questions. I really have been impressed by your thoughtfulness, and even if sometimes you think, oh, this seems like an elementary question, those questions can reveal the foundations that often we overlook when we're studying literature. So I'm grateful that you, to my mind anyway, I'm grateful for your good faith questions. Thank you very much for them. As I said, I will post another video next week with our overview for week 8. And until then, I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.